Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for Underrepresented Voices in the Archives. First, I want to look to see who the attendees are so far and say hi. Oh, it's wonderful to see so many great people here. People that have come to our last webinar and are here. Yay, this is great. Okay, so today we have the Underrepresented Voices in the Archive webinar. This is the second in our series. Our first was held about a month ago and entitled, "What Does the Huntington Have for Me? A Conversation with Huntington Curators." And you can find that on the Huntington website. This was one where we focused on the Mexico, US Southwest, and California collections chronologically from the 16th to 20th century. Today, we want to give you another peek behind the curtain. So my name is Natalia Molina. I'm a distinguished professor of American Studies and Ethnicity at the University of Southern California, and most recently, the author of A Place at the Nayarit, How a Mexican Restaurant Nourished a Community. And I have the honor of serving as the Interim Research Director at the Huntington Library. And I have the honor of letting you know that our permanent research director is Dr. Susan Juster from the University of Michigan, and she will be joining us officially beginning February 1st. Today, I'm very happy to bring two of our most sought after, enthusiastic, intelligent, helpful, interesting curators. So the first is Dr. Linde Lehtinen, who is responsible for the library's vast photography collection of over 800,000 images. She received her BA in art history from the University of Chicago and an MA and PhD from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And she's worked at several museums, including the Getty, Skirball Cultural Center, and San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, where she co-curated the exhibition The Train, RFK's Last Journey. And if you don't know what that is, Google it, because I had the pleasure of seeing her present on it and I was blown away. Her research interests include Asian and Asian American photography, especially from the Philippines and its diaspora, photography of California in the West, and archives in contemporary art. And she's published numerous articles, and she presents regularly on diverse topics, including histories of the photo book to decolonizing practices in the photography. Unfortunately, Dr. Karla Nielsen, who is also going to present today, is unable to join us. But luckily, our next presenter, Dr. Liwei Yang, will tell you a little bit about the collections that she oversees. And Dr. Liwei Yang has curated the Huntington's Pacific Rim collection since 2015. Prior to that, he was an assistant curator of Western American art, an institutional archivist, and a project archivist at the library. Dr. Yang has completed an MSc in history at the University of Edinburgh and an MLIS at San Jose State University. His research interests include Asian American history and East Asian rare books. And in 2015, he curated the Huntington Library's first exhibition on Chinese American history, Y.C. Hong, advocate for the Chinese American inclusion. And I myself have called upon his expertise many a time and have seen noted distinguished professors come through the Huntington and also rely on his expertise. So you all get to peek behind the curtain and see how you can also call on their expertise today. We especially wanted to do the webinar today, November 10th, because next week, November 15th, are applications for fellowships, both short-term, 1 to 5 months, and long-term for the entire academic year for 2023-24 closes. So we wanted to give people a sense who were thinking about applying a sort of more deep dive into the archive, so you could include that in your application either this year or next year, or just if you're planning on coming through. I'd also like to thank Natalie Serrano from the research division and Wes Hardity from our IT services for helping to put this workshop together, and to Catherine Wary Miller, who helped spread the word, along with our communications and marketing department by putting together flyers and promoting this on social media. The event is also being sponsored by Third LA with our friends at Institute for California in the West. So we just hope this reaches a broad audience because we want to see you all at the Huntington. And with no further ado, I will pass it on to Dr. Lehtinen.
Thank you so much, Natalia. I'll go ahead and share my screen. Okay, great. So just to orient you, I know Natalia said 800,000. I think we're actually approaching 1 million photographs in our collection at the library. And they really range from the 1850s to the present and include examples of a wide variety of print negative processes and different formats. While the collections, they are strongest in historical, documentary, and commercial photography, we also have fine art photography. So for today, after a brief introduction to our overall collection and key strengths, I want to transition to some materials that we have that highlight the library's existing and, I will say, growing holdings of Indigenous, Native American, Asian American, African American, LGBTQ photographs, many that you may not know about. I've included here some of our key collections and strengths. I know it's a long list. This is actually just the tip of the iceberg, but it gives you a sense of the range of materials that we have. The principal focus is California and the American West, and we have very significant bodies of work by people like Carlton Watkins, Alfred Hart, and Edward Curtis. And there's also a lot of documentation of Los Angeles's transition from a pastoral landscape to a metropolis. And a lot of this covers themes such as transportation, agriculture, tourism, urban planning and development. And you can see these through a lot of different photographic archives, such as the C.C. Pierce archive, Dick Whittington, Ernest Marquez, Southern California Edison, and Maynard Parker. Those are just a few that really tackle some of those topics. Other strengths include material on the American Civil War, as well as grand tours of the 19th century, so travel photography, especially in an incredible group of albums that we have by Lady Annie Brassey from the late 19th century. We also have a lot of photographically illustrated books and Native American images of Native American peoples and places, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Our recent collecting priorities include contemporary California women photographers, as well as any photography that intersects with other parts of our collection, such as history of medicine, aerospace, and as you'll see later with Lee Wei's presentation, Pacific Rim collections. I wanted to call your attention just to make sure that you know too that within our Huntington Digital Library, which you can access through our website, there is an area just for photography, and you can see that we have several digitized collections. I'm going to pull, since this text is kind of small in the screenshot, I'm going to pull up a larger version just so you see some of the ones that are there, and just to make sure you can use these as an instant visual resource. We are constantly trying to add to this and do different digitization projects of what we have. Our collections are vast, but we are trying to make some headway in this so that we can make it available to more researchers and our publics. Some ones that were recently added are views of Chinatown and also our Carlton Watkins albums and photographs, as well as stereo views. So those are things to just call out to make you aware of. So one of the most substantial collections is our Native American photographs, which have a very complex history that we are still really trying to work through and to grapple with because of questions of agency made visible through many of the images that were taken mostly by non-Native people, such as Edward Curtis, Frederick Monson, and Carl Moon. These are just a couple of examples here to show you the variety of what we have from different geographies and with different collections. It really covers a wide range. It's not just from areas in California or the Southwest, although we have a lot of material now. There are a lot of other areas around the United States that we have within our collection of Native American material. This particular photograph I wanted to call out, it's from a series made by a photographer, A. Frank Randall, of a female Native American scout. We think she was riding along with US soldiers, but it's possible she was part of a campaign to capture Apache peoples in Mexico, but we actually aren't sure. This is an example where we're still trying to do research. We would love researchers to come in and help us do research on something like this because it's a very powerful image that has a story to tell. And so far we are able to speculate, but we want to be able to really make more concrete assumptions and also narratives about something like this. So this is part of a collection of 123 photographs in a discbound album. So this is just one example. And these were taken by Randall using these sort of studio spaces, as well as some field photographs, again, of mostly tribes from Arizona and New Mexico. This is this 1888 album that I'm just mentioning is basically part of just one example of our rich holdings of Native American photography within the wider collection. And we did an assessment several years ago of thousands of images and that were all cataloged and digitized and made accessible, again, through the Huntington Digital Library. This was a massive project. And again, it is a very important resource to have, and one that is still unfolding. I'm working with several of our colleagues in the library to continue reviewing the collection, both the physical collection as well as our online collection related to this material, and think about what would our recommendations be for working with various representatives from these communities to help us continue to interpret these collections in the future. We will soon have a research guide available online just of our photography holdings in this area, but we hope to also extend that eventually to our other archives and manuscripts. And then we hope that that will be available sometime next year. We're still developing it and working with various colleagues to tighten it up and really make it very usable for people. Here is another example too from a collection, the Grace Nicholson collection. This has approximately 10,000 photographs, negatives and ephemera that were compiled or even taken by Grace Nicholson. She was a collector and dealer of Native American and Asian arts and crafts in Pasadena from the early part of the 20th century. And for those of you who may not know, the building that housed her collection would eventually become the USC Pacific Asia Museum. That's her on the left, and on the right is a view into her collection. And it includes, views of Native Americans in Northern California, particularly the Pomo people who were especially skilled in basket weaving. These are just a couple of examples. And I call this out because Nicholson's personal snapshots and albums, they give us this valuable resource for studying Native American communities during this period, but it also reveals a very complex relationship between a white woman who established deep connections with these groups of people. You can see her here with Mary Benson, a close friend of hers, but she was also acquiring artifacts for sale. So these are things that we need to wrestle with, like I said, and these are things for scholars to also engage with us on. I want to draw your attention to the image on the right. This is Rosa Burris Smith, who in our notes, she was apparently identified in consultation with Eastern Pomo speakers. So this is the kind of thing that we want to do more of in the future, working to put specific names to the faces and figures rather than simply having unidentified people, especially unidentified Indigenous people within the archive. I also wanted to mention we have a very good amount of material on Alaska Native communities within several collections at the Huntington. These are just a couple of examples here of the revenue cutters Bear and Corwin in Alaska from the 1880s and 90s. This was documenting the voyages of these ships to Alaska and depicting many different Native communities and activities. And on the right, from the William Wineland collection, he was a missionary who traveled to Alaska. And these, again, I wanted to pull out just some additional collections that we have relating to Native Alaskan material, just so you're aware again of the breadth that we have. And it's a very strong resource. Again, one that I was not aware of until I arrived here over a year ago. And so this was a great surprise. And these are used frequently by researchers. I also wanted to note that when I got here over a year ago, I did not realize that we had a substantial collection of both manuscript and photographic material related to the Philippines. This is a collection, and I know I'm veering from photography, but I swear it will come back to photography. But this is a collection of Emilio Aguinaldo papers. He was a Filipino who led the insurrection against Spain and later the fight for independence against the US. And this is just one sampling. We have a very rich box of documents related to the Philippine military campaigns against Spain and the US in the fight for independence. And I love even the details of, you can see at the end of one of the notes, it says Viva la República Filipina. And this is an example where I unfortunately do not speak Tagalog, nor it can translate it, and neither Spanish, but the documents are in Spanish, Tagalog, as well as other dialects. And this is the kind of material I would love for a researcher to be able to dig into even further. Also, when we're collecting, material, we think about how archives and manuscripts connect with visual material. And this is a great example where we have also these striking photographs from an album about the Spanish-American War, again, connected to the Aguinaldo endeavor in 1898. These are some more difficult images of death and destruction. On the left, you see the fires at night in Manila, and then the aftermath on the right of the next morning. We also have material from Filipino life in the 1940s. These are, and especially during World War II, these were made by a commercial photographer named H. Leroy Carlson, and he created albums as an inventory of his images for sale as souvenirs and postcards, and they depict Filipino people in various activities, doing posing along with street scenes and family celebrations. And these are just, again, a couple of examples from really rich, extensive albums. So this has prompted me a lot to think about how we can continue to add to the collection. And just this year, we added a group of over 800 real photo postcards. That is, postcards that are actually, they're photographs that are cut into postcard format from 1900 to 1950, featuring a range of scenes of daily life and activity in the Philippines, such as the tradition on the lower left of house moving called bayanihan, where you help your neighbors move physically your house as a community endeavor, as well as religious events such as this very, again, sorry, it's a bit difficult image, but of a self-flagellation ritual at Easter. These postcards also are a way to allow us to understand the different kinds of photography studios and businesses that were flourishing at the time. We can begin to trace those and based on the markings, based on the stamps. Some of these were even Japanese owned, which is very interesting. And again, that's an area that needs more research. So this is just one example of a collection that still needs to be fully mined and really looked at in depth. We also have this recent group of portraits that were from 1925 approximately. Some we think made by the Philippine Bureau of Science in Manila, which again, it still needs more research in terms of the origins of that and how these were disseminated. But in addition to them being, let's say, a kind of an ethnographic type of photograph, they also have, which again brings up a lot of different research possibilities and examinations. They're also wearing different clothing and textiles. I've even been talking to some scholars who are studying costume and textile patterns, and this could be a resource and something for people to work with and identify. This is an example of where sometimes these voices in the collection we find within larger collections, and they take a while to find. And it's something that I think that we need to also understand as part of how we find these images, how we find these stories. This is a group of tintypes that was just recently discovered as one of our incredible visual materials archivists, Suzanne Odie, was looking through and cataloging the Karl Maltz collection, which is a larger collection of carte visites and cabinet cards from a range of different photography studios across the country. And this group came up, and we are still in the middle of researching it, but we think this was possibly a family that had been enslaved in Maryland and came to California with another family in the mid-1850s. And we have some names. We think those are their names, but again, we're still verifying them. And this is where, we have these underrepresented voices within a larger archive, and it takes a while to discover and to really figure out how we can research them and bring the connections together. But this was a family, and here we have them here. So it is something we're excited, but also want to be careful about in terms of how we can continue to tell their story. Another group of work that we have is by an artist named Frances Benjamin Johnston. She was considered the first female photojournalist working actively in the late 19th century. We have over 1,200 of her photographs and corresponding glass plate negatives, which is a substantial amount. And it covers a lot of her time in Washington, D.C., where she was photographing famous people like Susan B. Anthony on the left, as well as embassies and legations. Here are some examples of the Korean and Chinese legation shown here. And these are cyanotypes, which is a specific type of photograph that in this case was used to sort of prepare and to sort of spot check and make sure that the image was what she wanted before she made the final black and white print. She also she was a lesbian, and at a time when asserting this part of oneself was kept private. She became a fierce advocate for women in photography. And for all of these reasons, we're really fortunate to have such a substantial group of her work at the Huntington. And I just wanted to be able to point that out as well. Lastly, we had a recent addition to our collection that we worked on with our colleagues at the Huntington Art Museum. This is the work of Laura Aguilar, and this is a self-portrait of Laura Aguilar, a Chicana photographer who was based in the San Gabriel Valley, who made work primarily between the 80s as well up until 2008. She passed away in 2018. And it includes, like as you can see, portraits of herself as well as friends and family and LGBTQ and Latinx communities. And I wanted to point this out too, that the Art Museum also has their collection that when researchers come, in addition to the library work that they do, there's correspondences with what's at the Art Museum, and you can use their collection as well for research. For the library, and in terms of acquiring some of Laura Aguilar's work, we were able to get a couple of different series. This is a series called Day of the Dead, in which she documented different celebrations and activities on the east side of Los Angeles. And she actually constructed that coffin that you see in the back and as a prop for a lot of these attendees who are coming to this event. And a lot of these people are people who are part of the vibrant Chicana, Chicano, Chicanx community, including people like Barbara Carrasco, Harry Gamboa, who you see here, and different people within artistic networks in Los Angeles. Other parts of this series include couples and families in and around their homes, again, wearing the traditional attire and makeup of Day of the Dead celebrations. And, as much as these are artful photographs, they also really are incredible documents of the deep connections between Mexican-American communities as well as artistic communities in Los Angeles in the 80s and 90s. So we can glean a lot of different research value from these as well. Lastly, her Plush Pony series also really came at a time when she was coming out and became much more involved in the LGBTQ community. Plush Pony was the name of a lesbian bar that was located in El Sereno, and she posed and worked with a lot of the people who were going to the bar and put this backdrop behind them and allowed them to be themselves, to pose, to take strength and pride in who they were. So this is just some samplings of things going from some of the earliest materials in our collection to more contemporary work to show you the range of what we have and how we're continuing to build and evolve when it comes to underrepresented voices and communities. So I'll turn it over now to Li Wei, who's going to discuss the Huntington Pacific Rim collections. Thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for coming today. It's a pleasure to meet you over Zoom. The Huntington's Pacific Rim collections cover a wide range of subjects and geographical areas. They include California, Hawaii, East Asia, the Philippines, maritime history, just to name a few. And for today's presentation, I'm going to focus on Asian American history with emphasis on Chinese and Japanese American history holdings that are here at the Huntington. Some of these collections were acquired by my curatorial predecessors. Some were donated to the Huntington by community members and collectors, and some were acquired from book dealers, manuscript dealers, photo dealers from around the world. The first item that I wanted to talk about is this 1849 labor contract that was signed between the Chinaman, and Jacob Lees. And so this is probably one of our earliest, if not the earliest, documents documenting the presence of the Chinese here in California. So around this time, this particular person, so his name is not even fully recorded in this contract, but he was contracted to come to California in order to work as a tailor. So this particular contract is listing his pay, which is $15 a month, and he was instructed to pay back his steamship passage cost back to the contractor as well too. And so something like this is really surprising to me, because you just simply don't see that many documents that has an active presence of the Chinese within it throughout this time period. But something like this with his signature on the bottom really says a lot, and also raises a lot of questions about whether when he was signing this particular contract, did he understand the terms of this contract? Did he understand that he has to pay back the transportation costs? Did he understand that his contract could be transferred to any other employers here in California as well too? But this is definitely one of the highlight items that I always showed to researchers and to people interested in early Chinese American history here at the Huntington. We have a wealth of visual materials as demonstrated in Linde's earlier presentation. And so the photo in the center, it's the photos of Alice and Charlotte Artai, taken probably around the 1880s. This photo was taken in Yokohama when Charlotte and Alice were going back to Hong Kong to attend a boarding school there in order to receive their classical Chinese education. And I think this particular photo, it's a great example of showing the agencies and the transnational nature of many of these Chinese Americans living in the United States at the time, because their parents, their father wanted them to receive a Chinese classical education that was, mostly not available here in the United States. And so that's why they were going to Hong Kong in order to go to a boarding school. And this picture was taken in Yokohama, which were the location of the not only the steamship stops at Yokohama, but then there were many photo studios catering to people who wanted to take souvenir photographs, just like this one. The other photos in this slide that you are seeing, you can see the images of Chinese grape harvesters, farmers in the San Gabriel Valley area. On the left right-hand corner, you are seeing a Chinese festival that was going on here in Los Angeles Old Chinatown at the time. And these were Chinese performers who were taking part in this performance to showcase Chinese culture. On the right, you're seeing the certificate of identity of this Chen Yu Yin, who was the wife of Chinese American immigration attorney Kenneth Fong around this time. And certificate of identity has a lot of special meaning for the Chinese, and this was the identifications that they needed in order to travel out of the country and to be able to get back into the United States during the Chinese exclusion era. Around this time too, just as in the 1850s, just as the Chinese were coming into California in large numbers, the United States was sending actually a squadron of ships to Japan. So these are the earliest impressions of the Americans recorded by Japanese artisans at the time when Commodore Perry led the squadron into Japan in order to establish the first official diplomatic encounters between the United States and Japan. And so these included the impressions of the Japanese, of the Americans, of their ship, of the uniform they're wearing, of the weapons they were carrying, and also the strategic Japanese defensive positions that was being put in place in case the Americans decided to attack the Japanese. And something like this is very important to the Pacific Rim holdings because it really paved the way because of this encounter and the treaties that was signed after that really paved the way for the future immigration of Japanese immigrants into the United States. When we're talking about Japanese immigration, maps is also something that we actively collect. And so this is a Japanese map of Hawaii published in 1906. And this particular map was created by a Japanese national who was living in Hawaii named Takai Neketsu. And when he created this particular volumes, it contains all the essential information for people in Japan who wanted to know about what life is like living and working in Hawaii, or the basic geographical information, where the jobs are, what the islands, geographical information. And around this particular map, you will also see the stores that are there at the time, Japanese stores catering to the Japanese immigrants, Japanese residents in Hawaii as well too. And so this particular map was printed and distributed throughout major cities in Japan in order to encourage the immigration to Hawaii around this time too. And this was sort of the tail end of the massive immigration of Japanese immigrants into Hawaii. As we all know that in 1907, the US and Japan entered into the gentlemen's agreements, and that greatly curtailed the number of Japanese immigrants coming into the United States. This is the Arthur Ito collection. This particular collection is documenting the Ito family's presence here in California, but they also talk about their journey, not only here in California, but into Mexico as well too. Because of the various discrimination and the law prohibiting against Japanese owning land here in the States. And the Ito family actually eventually relocated to Mexico and in order to own their own land, in order to have their own business operation over there too. So this is one of those rare operations that we have here documenting the early Japanese American agricultural workers and flower farmers who were here in California, but then also in Mexico, just like this one. In addition to the Ito families, we also have the Sakai Kozawa family papers, which is we are getting prepared to hopefully soon to catalog that collection, which is related to the very popular florist in Silver Lake called Tokyo Florist. And so these are some of the collections that we have in documenting the early Japanese American presence, especially in the flower trade businesses. Now we get back to the Chinese side again, and so this is the Y.C. Hong collection. So Y.C. Hong was one of the first Chinese American immigration attorneys here in Los Angeles. And within this collection, we have over 7,600 immigration case file that he created on behalf of his clients from roughly the mid-1920s to the 1970s. As you can see on the left, we have an affidavit that was being filed by Y.C. Hong on behalf of his clients. And sometimes within the files too, you will find documents such as certificate of residence, certificate of identity. Again, these were identification that was being imposed on the Chinese population in the United States during the exclusion era in order to track their presence, in order to make sure that they have the legal rights to be in this country. And if you're caught without these type of documentation as a Chinese person, you could potentially face deportation and arrest within the United States as well too. I also just wanted to mention, in addition to the Y.C. Hong collection, we also have the Chow and Sing collection, which is a law firm based in San Francisco, also containing thousands and thousands of immigration case files. Then that firm started a little bit later, starting in 1949. One of my recent acquisition is the Lisa C collection here. And so this is quite an interesting collection. So Lisa C, who wrote a bestseller in 1995 on Gold Mountain, documenting her family's history. And so her family in the 1930s actually found a collection of glass plate negatives, somewhere in the range of 300 of them, in Chinatown. And so they kept these glass negatives, and they were probably abandoned by a photo studio. Again, we don't know what photo studio, but we do have some clue. And so these contains never before seen images of residents, of streetscape, of people that were in Chinatown around this time. And what's interesting is that I think there is a high potential that the photographers themselves could be Chinese American, and these images were taken, requested to be taken by Chinatown residents as well too. What makes them so special is because when it comes to Los Angeles Old Chinatown, the part of the neighborhood was eventually demolished starting in the 1930s to make way for Union Station. And because there was so little documentation going on at the time, and so every single image, every single document that you can come across that tells us a little bit about Old Chinatown is helping us to put back the puzzle back together in order to gain a better understanding about what life was like living in this neighborhood here in Los Angeles. In addition to the glass plate negatives, we also have the C. Leong family papers. And so this is, again, relating to Lisa C's family in her book on Gold Mountain. And this collection documents mainly about the early C families. So you have Fang C and Lataisi Pruitt and their marriage here in California at the time, because the interracial marriage was not allowed in the state around this time. So they actually didn't get married in the traditional way. They actually went to a lawyer and drew a contract of partnership. That was how they determined to be married. And this collection contains documents about the history of F-Sui-1, which is the very profitable and very popular antique shop that was owned by the C family, but it also includes a menu such as the menu cover here you see on the right of Dragon's Den, which is also a restaurant that was being run by the C family. So I wanted to mention that I'm working with my colleague Inshi Lehtinen in the art division. We're trying to develop a exhibition based on not only old Chinatown history, but then also the artists who work within Chinatown around that time, mostly Asian American artists. If we want to move into the 1980s, this is the collection of Lily Lee Chen. She was the first Chinese American female mayor in the United States. So she was elected to the Monterey Park City Council in 1982, and she rotated into the mayor position in 1984. But during her tenure as mayor, there was a huge movement to try to establish some sort of national language requirements within the city of Monterey Park, because starting in 1965 was the liberalization of the immigration policy. There was a huge, there was an influx of Chinese residents into the city of Monterey Park and nearby communities as well too. And so there was a huge push to try to, in some cases, outlaw the display of Chinese languages on store signs, on business signs as well too. So there was a huge battle. And so this collection documents her time as mayor, but also her various political engagements throughout Southern California, and also her history in China and Taiwan as well too. Lastly, I just wanted to mention, because my colleague Karla Nielsen is not unable to be here, but I wanted to just make a brief mention about some of our potential collection here here at the Huntington. So from left to right, you have photos of Korean villagers that was being taken by Jack Linde in the Jack Linde Photograph and Negative collection. So he was a writer who wrote extensively about the Pacific, Alaska, California, but he also served as a war correspondent during the Russo-Japanese War. And so there are hundreds of amazing photos taken in Japan and Korea around that time. And then we also have the Octavia E. Butler collection. And so she is a very popular science fiction author and the first African-American woman to be in that field. And she's also the first sci-fi writer to receive the MacArthur Fellowship in 1995. And so this is one of our most popular collections. It contains her manuscript, typescript, her proofs, and her notes, everything that you can see about her creative process as a science fiction writer. And finally, I wanted to point out the Yone Noguchi papers, which is also in Karla's collection. And so Yone Noguchi is the father of the famed American sculptor Isamu Noguchi. And this particular collection contains of his time traveling around the United States. And he was the first Japanese to publish an English poem here in the US. And thank you so much for spending the time with us. And I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Great, thank you. I'm sure you're feeling like I am when I'm at the Huntington, which is like this. I'm always amazed and gobsmacked at what we find. And this is really the impetus for doing this kind of webinar. So I just want to kind of string together a few through lines for the presentations. One, we're not just sharing materials, right? We're not just like pointing you towards a card catalog. We're really making clear that the curators are invested in responsible storytelling. So the collections they acquire, they think about, who is labeling the collections, who gets to produce this knowledge. How can we collaborate with the scholars that come to the Huntington to give more voice to the collections that we have? How might we even take something like the Jack London collection and not just look at it through the perspective of Jack London, but try to subvert that gaze? Other surprises you might see are that, you might think about a Latinx collection, but it's actually, really rich in the LGBTQ community. You might be doing cultural studies, but then you might come across, the Laura Aguilar papers. You might also be thinking about when you do Asian immigration to the United States, you might think you only go to the National Archives, but actually through our YC Hong collection, we have those 600 affidavits. And you might think, well, this is a place where the images produced are only by the colonial gaze. Actually, we have Lisa C's collection of those glass plate negatives. So there should have been at least 20 things that blew your mind or surprised you today. But we also know that people have their own research questions, and we want to help you prepare. So I know there's one table already out there, or a table, one question already out there. And I think, Linde, had you volunteered to answer it, or you wanted to speak on it?
I was more just saying, yes, it's amazing. He's saying, wow, amazing, you have the original papers. Yeah, no, it was a surprise to see that, and that we, I think, acquired them quite early in the history at the Huntington, which again is a surprise. And I think that having a foundation like that has helped us to add more to the collection in those areas. So that's another example too, where you can have one thing that is a really core thing in terms of the history of colonization in the Philippines, both by Spain as well as the United States, and then begin to think about what happens after that and how you fill those things. So, and as I said, I would love if there are people who could come in and we could work on translations together, because the script is very difficult also to read. At the late 19th century script is also challenging. So this is also a bit of an appeal that we have them. Please come and let's try to work through them together.
That's just picking up on something Linde just said. When you come to the Huntington, it's like when you're a professor or a TA and you want people to come to your office hours. Don't be afraid of the curators. I myself have been that way, where I'm like, I don't want to bother them, they're so busy. But let them know you're coming. Let them know about your project, because you might look in our card catalog and say, oh, yeah, I'm going to look at these collections, or I'm going to follow up on everything they said today. But they might actually be like, oh, there's this collection that we're processing, and let me give you a peek behind the curtain. Or, yes, that's the main collection, but actually you can find parts of it in these other two collections. So the curators are the faculty of the Huntington. So we need to be in dialogue with them. This might be a good time, Wes, if you don't mind pulling up the search tab, so we could search. Are there any photos of Calle de los Negros in Old Chinatown 1870s? So let's go to...
Liwei might be able to answer that one more readily.
Like if we were looking in the library catalog, Liwei, if we didn't have you right here, what would we just type in the Calle de los Negros, or what would you suggest, or Chinatown, or?
Actually, if you go to the Huntington Digital Library, you might be able to pull up a few of images that we have digitized. So I think the names of this particular photo, you could type in Calle de los Negros and see if it comes up. But there are many variations of the names. Or if you just type in Old Chinatown, you might be able to see it. So yes, these are the few of the images of the alley that we're talking about, but these are probably not exactly 1871. So 1871 was when the massacre took place, and so as far as I know, there's really no images except maybe one over at Los Angeles Public Library of the actual massacre, or immediately after the massacre. But we do have images of a few years after the massacre that took place in 1871.
Thank you. Lois has a question that everybody who applies for a fellowship has, which is, there's a limited word count for the project narrative, and yet there's so much to convey to the readers, I'm assuming reviewers of the application. How do I write about all these activities? Do the best you can. The way that our fellowships work is that because we are a collections-based institution, our fellowships are collections-based. So you simply, you apply, we also share it with the curators so that the curators can chime in and say, oh yeah, there's enough material for this person to look at here. And so the curators will kind of help you make that argument. So don't worry about that.
May I add just a little bit to that too?
Yeah, of course.
Sometimes it does help if you are searching for specific things, because I know she's saying, oh, just saying the Huntington has a lot of Civil War photographs and maps. If there is a specific collection or something that you think will really help to put that in, that also makes it a little bit more tangible to us as we read the applications.
Yeah, the more tangible, thank you. The more tangible you can make it, the better, which is why we wanted to show you how to search. Our good friend Amy Bang at Pomona says, beyond photographs, are there also Native American documents and manuscript collections, maps?
We do have a lot of the documents are not necessarily, they're not by Native Americans, but they are written by people who were either at that time writing about them or trying to, or working with different communities. Maps, I don't know if we have, I need to check on that. I'm not sure of the maps section, but we have compiled, as I mentioned, we're working on a larger list of all of our resources relating to both manuscripts and archives relating to Native American and Indigenous people. So that is eventually going to end up being part of a larger research guide that we'll have available online. But yes, we do.
Right now, is there anything they can look at in the catalog to kind of get them to some of those sources, or what are the key terms that we're using right now if they're looking at Native American documents and manuscript collections?
Let me give me a second on that, because I want to see how my other colleagues have looked that up in their assessments. Because the thing is, there are so many different, whether you look it up under a tribe name, whether you look at under, there's a lot of different variations, and I just don't want someone to get completely overwhelmed. I mean, yeah, 1,500 hits on Native American is, if you could also do the advanced search and then try Native American, but then with archives and manuscripts as a way to limit it. And you could do the same with printed maps and see what you get.
And maps is a great way to go too. I was really interested in your presentation, Liwei, the way that you showed those maps in Hawaii in terms of kind of guides. So we might think of those maps as guides. We tend to think of guides as being about that narrative, the text. But in your case, it was place-based and geographic. So that was interesting. Jennifer Chen asks, I'd love to know more about the Pacific Rim collection. Do you anticipate additional archives being added in the next few years? What a fascinating collection. Thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you, Jennifer. Yes, so the Pacific Rim collections really is a large geographical and subject collection. And so in addition to the Asian American collection I'm showing you today, we also cover areas such as Hawaii, the Philippines, East Asia, and throughout the Pacific as well too. And so as far as collections, we are constantly adding every single day is a little bit exaggeration, but yes, it is something that we are doing. So whether it is a donations by community members or by collectors. So for example, this weekend, I'm driving down to Carlsbad to pick up a collection, which I can't reveal just yet. And then I'm also scheduled to go to Temecula. I'm scheduled to go to Hawaii next year in order to pick up new collections that can add to the Pacific Rim as well too. And so yes, there is a very active collecting activity going on by every single curator, including myself and Linde. And we are doing not only getting donation, but we also have given budgets in order to talk to book dealers and see what items are fitting for our collection areas as well too. And I also just wanted to mention, we also work with the Collectors Council here in the library. So the Collectors Council is a very generous group of donors for the Huntington, and they get together every year, and curators such as myself and Linde, we pick items that are typically out of our normal purchase budgets, and we present these items to them in order for them to vote on what to help the Huntington acquire in order to add those collections to the Huntington. So just in case in the past we have collected, I have also added such as the first Japanese English dictionaries from the 1830s. I have also added the scrolls that I showed you earlier of Commodore Perry's incursion into Japan. And so these are some of the ways for us to enlarge the collection. So yes, we are doing lots and lots of collecting.
Thank you. Just a couple comments. Our implacable curator, Peter Blodgett, who already helped us with our first webinar, is nice enough to be a support crew here today as well. So he also recommended looking up Indians of North America for a very reliable entry point as well for the online catalog. So Indians of North America. So that speaks to Amy's previous question. Judith Jackson Fawcett, who I had the pleasure of being a fellow or reader many years ago with, says, I've spent the better part of 15 years in the card catalog, stacks, and archives at the library and can speak to its unexpected breadth and the amazing archival scenes you might find while researching something else. The value of the stacks cannot be underestimated, and I'd request if the curatorial staff can emphasize this more, especially for scholars before 1900 and scholars of race, the Atlantic world, etc. And that feeds into the question above, where Jenny Staples says, besides the Karl Mautz collection, are there any other materials, photos, letters, contracts regarding formerly enslaved folks? And before the curators answer that, I just want to say the Huntington is one of the centers for looking at enslaved peoples. I think we tend to think about enslaved peoples in the South, and we tend to think of centers on the East Coast, like the Omaha Center. But I can tell you, by serving as the interim research director, the variety of projects that come through us, through our fellows, Professor Kevin Dawson from UC Merced, who's looking at sailors and canoe makers and divers. Oh yes, these are all enslaved peoples, right? Just really, and how by having these important roles, it subverts the power dynamic in between master and servant. We have Professor Brett Rushforth, who is doing this incredible project that even looks at slave societies. We often talk about silences in the archives, and he kind of pushes that, saying, actually, sometimes they want those silences. They're trying to maintain their autonomy. So the projects that come through us are just amazing. So with that, can you talk a little bit more about any other materials regarding formerly enslaved peoples?
We're doing searches right now. If you actually, if you go to the library catalog and even try the word enslaved, you might be able, there are some things that are coming up. Again, I'm not as familiar with the manuscripts part, so that's why I'm trying to look. There is, it looks like there's a manuscript that says there's a bill of sale for an enslaved woman, Laura, and her child from 1853 that we seem to have. Yeah, you can start looking through that.
And when we pass out information after, it'll include the email to reader services, is that correct? So you could also contact our reader services, and they'll help direct you. They might consult with a curator, they might be able to help you with the search, but you know, today is only the beginning. It's just the tip of the iceberg.
Yes, I also wanted to add that we have 14 curators in the library curatorial departments, and so we look after individual subjects and fields. And so even if something that we cannot answer today right away, but as long as you send an email to reader services, they're going to distribute those emails to the right curators who can answer your question more fully.
And Liwei, can you talk a little bit about the Lisa C collection, since my understanding is not all the images are available. So how does that work?
So in the Lisa C collection, there are glass plate negatives. They are extremely fragile, and they're in the negatives. And so right now we are working very hard with our conservation lab to clean the plates, and then also working with our digitization lab to digitize them. So last time I checked, we are going to have about roughly 110, 120 of them cleaned and digitized, and they're going to be available on the Huntington Digital Library. Because these are fragile materials, we do not allow people to look at them in the reading room just yet. So we need time to make sure that any broken ones are being put together, or if they are dirty, because these were rescued from a trash pile, according to Lisa, by her family, and it's been sitting in her home for 70, 80 years. And so there is a lot of conservation that are required to do. And so, but our goal is to try to catalog them as soon as we can, and try to clean the materials, and then to make them digitally available. And so I think by the end of by the end of this year, you are going to see the first 100 of them on the Huntington Digital Library.
Wonderful. I think you dropped so much knowledge that I think we may be at the end of the webinar. Any last questions, friends? Okay. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. I think, oh, Wes, what would we do with Wes, without Wes from IT helping us with everything, including I'm gonna try this, Wes, including this QR code where we have a lot of the resources. We'll also send you an email afterwards, because what would we do without Natalie Serrano helping us out? Oh, and so in this, it has key photograph collections and strengths. It has digital resources. It has the collections mentioned in the web. Oh my gosh, they continue to drop knowledge. 5 pages, links to all the collections mentioned, as well as additional resources. The current research fellows, library page, library catalog, digital library. I'm bookmarking this on my own screen right now. So, okay, everyone. Thank you so much. Oh, no. I see we provoked it. Now we have 2 more. We have a little bit. Thanks so much. And thank you. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Lois. Thank you all of the many people who came today. And thank you especially to Li Wei and to Linde, who shared their knowledge, their passion, and their critical eye with us. Thanks so much. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.